the BCLC Added Value in Emerging Markets Conference. We are very fortunate to have Miguel Salinas, who is the Senior Manager of Corporate Social Responsibility for Adobe. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you.
So that's a big title, and that's probably a pretty big job. What do you do?
I actually am fortunate to work in the Corporate Social Responsibility group for Adobe that is focused on making sure that Adobe is doing good while doing good as a business. So our department is fairly multi-layered. It includes the Adobe Foundation, which handles a lot of our philanthropy initiatives, but it's also sort of a convener role to really bring in colleagues from other areas, so our facilities departments and supply chain and procurement, other areas, to make sure that we're all sort of heading towards a common strategy worldwide in the way that we do business.
Does a technology company like you have supply chain issues? And the reason I ask that question is that 10, 15 years ago, there were some clothing manufacturers, clothing retailers who actually had some issues in their supply chain that they had to address. Does technology, because of the lessons perhaps that were learned from there, look out carefully to see where the technology products come from?
Well, because we're a global company and because we definitely engage with vendors all over the world, we're very careful. I mean, that does come into play on how we do business. But to your point, it's not as intensive as perhaps a manufacturing company. You know, I know in the past Nike had some issues, and in fact, it seems like that's what really spurred this whole corporate social responsibility movement way back when. So I think we're very careful and look at other companies and their best practices and how they do it and apply those that are appropriate for our business.
A lot of companies have a primary focus of their corporate social responsibility and their philanthropic outreach. Does Adobe have that?
Absolutely. It was about 7 years ago that we took, and I think a lot of companies have a similar story, but as corporate social responsibility really became more prominent, we did a shift from standard philanthropy that had been part of the company's tradition forever to a bit more strategic corporate social responsibility focus. Part of that was looking at where we could make a larger impact and use our investments, both financial and otherwise, more strategically. So we formed a signature initiative called Adobe Youth Voices. And when we did the research process, we really looked at what Adobe stood for as a company, and this idea of empowering people around the world to create and to express themselves and to communicate really resonated with us and was really core to how we formed this program. So the idea of engaging young people in this process of creating and expressing themselves is a really brilliant learning experience and learning process. So that's really kind of what was in the back of our mind when we designed that program.
So what are some of the specifics with regard to the youth voices? If I had an 8-year-old in my home, which I happen to have, and I would be thinking about, wow, what can my 8-year-old learn from Youth Voices? What would happen?
Well, it's actually multi-layered. We work with primarily educators, and both in and out of school, and we work with an age group between 13 and 18, so middle to high school. And the goal is to give educators a new way of engaging young people who are today disengaged with the learning experience. It's not relevant to their lives. It's not compelling. When you look at our world and we're always on devices or we've got media always in front of us, that's the world that a younger generation is growing up in. So when you think about the responsibility to teach them, to take responsibility for the next generation, you need to speak their language, in other words. And we see this worldwide. It's not just a US issue, which makes the Adobe Youth Voices program so relevant to what we're doing, because we are really having an impact worldwide on education and giving educators tools to be able to teach in a different way. What young people are learning through the Adobe Youth Voices program is not only technical skills, so they're certainly learning software, they're learning how to use computers, they're learning how to create a media project. When you really unpack that experience, they're learning how to communicate, they're learning how to work in teams, they're learning how to think critically about issues that they care about, and they're also learning how to communicate creatively and effectively to a broad audience to really affect change on issues that are important to them.
You work in emerging markets then as well?
The Adobe Youth Voices program is now in 50 countries.
Really?
Yeah.
And because it's Youth Voices, then that means it is targeted to youth. Are you seeing any pushback from old people like me?
No, not really. I mean, I think that the Adobe Youth Voices program is designed to empower the next generation and really prepare them for not only the workforce of tomorrow, so how to be proficient on technology, but also for the world of tomorrow. Our young people need to have a more global perspective. They need to be more compassionate about issues that impact communities and impact the world that they live in. And they also need to be empowered to take responsibility to make change and to be a catalyst for dialogue to make change. And that really is the core of the program. I don't think you'll find any adult around the world that would argue that those are some noble goals.
So how's it working so far? I mean, in terms of our youth, through Youth Voices, able to find a way for them to make change themselves?
Absolutely. We have, as part of the program, and we designed this when we started it 6 years ago, we really felt that we needed to understand the impact. It's not just a program that we show off and it's great and we go home. It really is, we really want to tell the story about what change we're trying to make and then how we're doing against that. So our evaluation over the last several years has shown a lot of increase for educators specifically, increase in their technology familiarity. And their comfort of using technology to teach in new, compelling, and relevant ways. They're also being re-inspired to teach. A lot of, which is sort of an unintended outcome, but it really is amazing to get feedback from educators saying, wow, when I went through this program and engaged my young people, it just made teaching so much fun, and it reminded me why I'm teaching. So again, that's not data, that's not a bullet point on a PowerPoint presentation, but it's something that we really take seriously in the impact that we're having.
Actually, it's a story that I can identify with because, I mean, I can tell that there are some teachers that are having difficulties because they're, I mean, like all of us in professions, sometimes we beat our head against a wall and we say, how can we have the impact? Of all of the countries that you work, is there a difference in dealing with a teacher in an emerging market versus a teacher in a developed market like the United States?
I think what we're finding, the differences of working internationally in the education sphere versus the U.S. is that there are a lot of similarities. But there are some cultural differences. So obviously language is one. So we're really looking directly at how do our training materials get localized. So that's one big issue that we're seeing that we're dealing with now. But it's really interesting because teachers around the world, or educators around the world, are dealing with the same things. Support from their principals and administrators, technology infrastructure that's available to them in their classrooms that is not up to standards of today's world. Time. They have to teach so many other things. So how are they going to incorporate or take time to get the skills to incorporate technology into that? Professional development, same thing. Time and or support to grow as an educator and to stay current with new methods of teaching, i.e. through technology. So honestly, I would say those issues are pretty consistent regardless of the country that you're in. And then the differences are the obvious ones. We have sites in India that have periodic electricity and not very good internet connectivity. But they're doing it because they see the value of it, and it's a really wonderful thing to see that they're benefiting from it, even though they have these circumstances they're dealing with.
Okay, hard question now. From Adobe standpoint, what's your favorite success story from your work?
Wow, my favorite success story is, well, there's several, but I would say there's a young man from Redwood City, California. His name's Gabriel, and he was part of the program at our site there at the Boys and Girls Club of Redwood City, and met him several years ago, went through the program, was really great at making media and engaging. He was hired at the Boys and Girls Club to be a mentor to other young people. He sent me an email a few months ago and basically said, through his experience, he figured out what he wanted to do. He wanted to do this kind of work for a living, and he got into Stanford graduate school to study technology and education. And when I just read that email, again, that's stuff you don't get in a survey and a PowerPoint slide and a data point, but this is a real person.
No, that's a high five moment right there.
Whose life was changed by this, and that will stay with me forever. Yeah.
Now let's go kind of to the other side. Let's put it this way. What is a success story yet to be a success?
I think for the Adobe Youth Voices program, success is measured in a couple of ways. I think it is certainly evaluation data that shows us change is happening. Skills are being developed. Young people are changing their perspectives. They're feeling valued. Their voices being heard. They're learning something. Educators are teaching differently and seeing the value of this methodology or using technology to teach. But I think on the other side, it's stories like Gabriel's that are success. I think even if a young person we see data that a young person goes through the program and they're not an amazing media maker, but they say, wow, I can really now work in groups, or I never really felt empowered to contribute to a discussion, or wow, I didn't know young people like me in India are dealing with these things. That to me is success as well.
All right, now you're 10 years down the road, and you're looking back, and you remember this interview, and you're saying, wow, this guy asked me this question, and this question is, how'd you do in those 10 years? Were you with Youth Voices and other programs that you may implement at Adobe, were they successful?
I think for me, success, looking back after 10 years, would be that the education system wouldn't need investments like ours. Because the value of a program like this, the value of bringing technology into the classroom, the value of empowering educators to teach in different ways and stay up to speed on current trends in technology and teaching methodology is what I would want to look back and see. I would want to see that the seeds that we planted for educators now and building their skills stay with them through their teaching career, so that they're using this kind of experience to inspire and empower young people throughout their teaching career.
Miguel, thank you very much.
No, thank you for having me.